Weapons Inspector David Kay and acting Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. They addressed the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee Annual Policy Conference. This is an hour 25 minutes from Sunday.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the AIPAC Policy Conference. Our program will now begin.
The pain of those Jewish settlers being forced out of Gaza is all too real. They will remember it for the rest of their lives.
And I'm sure that we'll be able to implement the disengagement plan with all its difficulties quietly and peacefully.
It's a significant moment in history that you're seeing unfold right now, laden with tremendous emotions.
Now that Israel has withdrawn, the way forward is clear. The Palestinians must show the world that they will fight terrorism and govern in a peaceful way.
This one was earlier. The last Israeli troops had pulled out of the region. Palestinian crowds tore apart some synagogues and set them on fire.
Palestinian infighting erupts in gunfire on the streets of Gaza. Violence, a symbol of the generational rift within the ruling Fatah party. Well, Fatah officials warn that if Hamas wins the parliamentary elections, it would, quote, drive the final nail into the coffin of the peace process.
Good evening from Jerusalem. We begin tonight with a sea change in the Middle East. Hamas, the militant Islamic group that calls for the destruction of Israel, has won the Palestinian parliamentary elections in a landslide.
One after another, world leaders have called on Hamas to renounce violence, to recognize the state of Israel. Otherwise, they say, it can't be business as usual.
As we have said, you cannot have one foot in politics and the other in terror.
Every step toward freedom in the world makes our country safer, so we will act boldly in freedom's cause.
In Egypt today, voters went to the polls in that country's first ever competitive president.
Millions of Afghans went to the polls today in an historic election.
Today is a monumental day in Iraq's march toward democracy as Iraqis vote for the first time in a constitutional government.
Another American has been killed in Iraq today.
The entire Arab world and much of the world in general is now watching as Saddam Hussein and 7 other defendants are brought up on charges related
5 other American soldiers and 1 Marine were also killed in separate attacks.
And the Americans and Iraqis have established a combat outpost in the middle of the western desert to stop.
Huge challenges still face the Iraqis and the coalition, but there are important signs of progress.
Terrorists like bin Laden are serious about mass murder, and all of us must take their declared intentions seriously.
It has happened again. The world jolted by the horror of terrorism.
Down the end of the road as quickly and as safely.
This morning, there was another deadly act of terrorism in Egypt.
Investigators in Indonesia are trying to track down the plotters of
Al-Qaeda targeted the hotels to kill, quote, Jews and crusaders, but most of the dead and wounded are Jordanian.
We're going to begin in Israel, where terrorists strike again.
Absolute and utter devastation, as I say, shattered glass, broken glass cars.
CNN, a number of casualties are reported in an explosion on Tuesday at a shopping mall in Netanya in Israel.
Begin with terror in the Israeli coastal town of Hadera. Israeli police say a suicide bomber has killed at least 5 people.
Police and rescue workers say the bomber blew himself up outside a bus station Sunday in the town of Beersheba. 21 people were hurt, 2 of them seriously.
Islamic militant groups have previously said
they have no shortage of young men prepared to kill themselves in order to kill Israelis.
Again in Beirut today, a massive and emotional crowd packed in downtown Beirut. This for the funeral of Rafik Hariri this morning. Hysterical mourners grabbed at the coffin of the assassinated former prime minister. There have been angry shouts accusing Syria of involvement in Monday's bombing.
State Department official today called for a complete and immediate withdrawal of Syrian troops from Lebanon.
North in this country, south in this country, east and west, cities are once again burning. What does it mean for France? And indeed, what does it mean for the wider Europe? Perhaps simply an early skirmish between old Europe and the new Europe made up largely of Arab and African immigrants.
The firestorm ignited last week when newspapers, first in Denmark, then in other European countries, printed caricatures of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. The protests spread to Lebanon from Syria, where the Danish and Norwegian embassies were attacked and set ablaze.
Let's begin with Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and his decision to quit the Likud party.
This is a political scenario never before seen in modern Israeli history. A sitting Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, will abandon his ruling Likud party. He'll jump ship and he'll form a brand new centrist political movement.
Following Sharon's departure, Benjamin Netanyahu has returned as head of the Likud party. 6 years after he left the helm, Bibi is back. Amir Peretz is now the chairman of the Labor Party. In a stunning upset, he defeated Shimon Peres, reshuffling the political deck in Israel.
For the second time in less than 3 weeks, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has been rushed to the hospital. He suffered a stroke.
As Ariel Sharon lies unconscious, the reins of power have passed to this man, Ehud Olmert, the Deputy Prime Minister.
You know, Israel, as you know, is a vibrant democracy with very strong institutions, with long-lasting traditions, rule of law. And what is important, that it is a seamless transition of power.
Iran today reaffirmed its determination to resume nuclear processing. Now, the nuclear challenge came as Iran's new president took office in Tehran. Iran's president stood before the UN General Assembly a little more than a week ago to deliver a harsh diatribe against those who would block its nuclear ambitions.
Iran, defying much of the international community, restarted its uranium conversion program at their Isfahan nuclear installation on Monday.
President Bush warns Iran, step back from building a nuclear bomb.
Iran, armed with a nuclear weapon, poses a grave threat to the security of the world.
The UN's Atomic Energy Agency held an emergency meeting today in Vienna following Iran's resumption of critical nuclear processing.
27 of the 35 nations on the IAEA Board of Governors voted to refer Iran's case to the UN Security Council.
Iran's new president says Israel is a blight and should be wiped off the map. He goes on to deny the Holocaust ever occurred.
The current president of Iran has announced that the destruction of Israel is an important part of their agenda. And the development of a nuclear weapon would make him a step closer to achieving that objective.
As the Imam said, Israel must be wiped off the map. Wiped off the map.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome AIPAC President Bernice Manocherian.
Days quickly gave way to a year of challenge, a year of change, a year of conflict, a year of courage. We held our breath during the days of disengagement. We hoped for the best of worst-case scenarios as Palestinian polls showed growing popularity for the party committed to Israel's destruction. We listened to the words, wipe Israel off the map. eerily familiar, but laced with a new intensity, a new venom. We watched as a nation, bereft of its leader, embrace the democratic values that they have fought so long to preserve, and a seamless transition of power took place. But we did more than hope and listen and watch and wait. We helped to shape the past year through our actions, our decisions, and our leadership. Together, we worked with our friends in Congress and with the administration to ensure that Israel had the vital economic, military, and diplomatic support she needed from her one and only steadfast friend. Together, we worked with our country's leaders to put terrorists and despots on notice. Their actions would have consequences. Legislation to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Policies to isolate Hamas. Strategies to tackle Hezbollah. You and I together, in meetings, in phone calls, in lobbying appointments and conversations, helped to shape America's guiding principles regarding the Middle East. And in so doing, we continue to strengthen the United States and Israel. In these last 2 years, I have felt especially privileged to be part of this community and of this extraordinary organization. As AIPAC's president, I have had the opportunity to get to know so many of you and have developed a real appreciation for the members, the activists, and the leaders who indeed make AIPAC the most important organization affecting Israel's future. Special appreciation and recognition go to my colleagues on AIPAC's board of directors. I cannot imagine working with a more intelligent, a better informed, a more committed group of individuals. I am so very grateful to each and every one of you for everything that you have done to make my job easier and to ensure that AIPAC is strong and successful. Special recognition goes to 4 individuals who are finishing up their terms on AIPAC's board. I know that they will continue to lead in their hometowns as well as nationally. They are among our community's finest. Senator Rudy Boschwitz, Bev Canold, Randall Kaplan, and Nina Rosenwald. Thank you. I thank you and all of my colleagues on the board of directors for your invaluable efforts, for your counsel, and for your friendship, which are all very precious to me. I will have more to say about my successor, Howard Friedman, later in our conference, but I do want to congratulate him and say how fortunate AIPAC is to have him assuming this presidency at such an important time in our history. There is another person who served on the board of this organization with distinction for many, many years, whose presence is profoundly missed today. Beulah Friedman, who passed away recently, was bright, energetic, creative, and one of my very dear friends. I miss her, and we all miss her special enthusiasm for AIPAC. Our professional staff in Washington, D.C., and in our regional offices all over this blessed land are truly extraordinary. They are all so exceptional that I wish I had the time to recognize each of them individually as they so richly deserve. But I do want to single out AIPAC's Executive Director, Howard Kaur, with whom I have worked so closely these last few years. I have come to appreciate and to understand in ways I never did before the scope of Howard's impact on our community and on the future of our people. It has been an amazing privilege to lead this organization, and I thank you all for having given me that opportunity. In these next few days, it will be our presence in this capital city, our actions and our interactions, and the more than 450 separate lobbying appointments taking place on Tuesday that will help to determine the future direction of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Good friends, I am grateful for your recognition of the crucial importance of this year's policy conference. And thank you for your acute awareness of the critical passage of time and for putting personal agendas aside to act quickly on the issues which confront us. Once again, we have come to our nation's capital in record numbers from every state in the Union, from more than 560 cities, and over 300 college campuses in all 50 states. Thank you for understanding the importance of your participation, of our participation together. We are more than 5,000 strong. Ladies and gentlemen, this is AIPAC's largest policy conference ever, and we are sending a very clear message. When our people need us, we are here. Now is the time for action. Now is the time for leadership. Now is the time for AIPAC. For the last several months, we have heard the vicious words of one man, his rhetoric an almost daily reminder of the threats facing Israel and America too. For Ahmadinejad, a world without Israel and America is a fulfillment of his dream. It is his stated goal. For me, and for so many of you, a world without Israel is a world that we remember all too vividly. I remember my mother trying to shield my sister and me from the horrors taking place in Nazi Europe. And I remember as she worked tirelessly to help our people escape. I remember the letters asking for the U.S. government to come to their aid. Newspaper articles filled with chilling accounts of deportations, and then the sickening silence that replaced their cries for help. It is a memory that shaped my life as a Jew, as an American, and as a political activist. Time after time, it is that memory that spurs me to action and to leadership. It is the reason I commit to a strong America and Israel. The reason I commit to politics and to AIPAC. But mine is one story among the thousands in this room. Collectively, our experiences make AIPAC what it is: a dedicated community of passionate individuals who know all too well what silence and inaction can bring, and are committed to a strong and bright future for the United States and for Israel and for our people all over the world.
I came to my involvement with Israel a bit by accident. I was a senior in college in 1973, and I had planned on taking a year off, and I was going to study Renaissance art in Italy. And just then the Yom Kippur War breaks out. I realized I was going to go study in Israel. And I went there and came to understand and appreciate the role, the crucial role that Israel plays in the destiny of Jewish people. I made a call upon someone who was an AIPAC activist. And then as I was leaving his office, he said, "You do know what AIPAC is, don't you?" I said, "I kind of do. I sort of do." And I stated what I thought it was, got it completely wrong. And then he told me what it was. And it was the kind of the cartoon-like light bulb that went off. Refugees. And I had always felt one foot not really completely American. And that day was the single most empowering day of my adult life. The legacy to our children is not just whatever they may inherit from us. It's the world that they will inherit from us too. And in our little way, we want to help affect what that world is going to be. And so our thought is that by helping to support AIPAC and the Tomorrow campaign, that there's a little bit more certainty that the AIPAC of tomorrow will be strong and secure. As much as I do for AIPAC, and I do stuff every single day, I absolutely don't believe that I have ever given back what I have gotten from AIPAC. It has helped me to be a more focused supporter of Israel. It has helped me to be a more self-confident American.
Friends of Israel, friends of AIPAC, we are in a moment of history right now.
It's important for a person to be part of something larger than themselves, whether it's an organization, whether it's a team, or whether it's a people. I commit to AIPAC because I really believe that in an uncommon and an uncommonly focused way, AIPAC is able to get a result for the safety, security, and economic well-being of Israel that no other organization can do.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome AIPAC's Executive Director, Howard Kaur.
Thank you very much. I first want to say thank you very much to Yossi Siegel for the tremendous example that you set. Yossi, thank you. My friends, organizations are judged by their leaders, and so it is with AIPAC and its board of directors. Men of women and women of character, of leadership, of passion and commitment that they bring every day to this cause. But in particular, the responsibility that the president of AIPAC has at any particular moment is truly a significant responsibility unlike any that exists in the organized Jewish community. I just want to take a moment to say thank you and express our collective appreciation to Bernice Manocherian for her leadership. Whenever AIPAC needed it over these last 2 years, Bernice was available whenever her passion and her commitment and her intellect to face the challenges that AIPAC and Israel and the United States face. Bernice was there, always with a sense of grace, with a sense of dignity, with a sense of humanity that marks Bernice. Bernice, I just want to say thank you for your leadership and our partnership over these last 2 years. Thank you. I look forward to not only our continued friendship, but your continued guidance and trust. I also want to take special recognition of AIPAC's chairwoman of the board, Amy Friedkin, to express appreciation to Amy for your commitment and your ongoing devotion as chairwoman of the board of AIPAC. Thank you, Amy. And to Howard Friedman, AIPAC's incoming president, I offer congratulations to you and your family, both your immediate family and your extended family in Baltimore and elsewhere. But we are blessed at AIPAC to have someone of Howard's passion and energy and commitment, and I look forward to working with you and developing the kind of partnership that will be required in the coming days, weeks, months, over the next 2 years. Howard, thank you and congratulations. These three individuals are the kind of political activists, the kind of leaders that AIPAC attracts, and we are fortunate to call them members of the board of AIPAC, and here are the rest of the board of directors.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome AIPAC board member Russ HOLDSTEIN.
Every one of us understands the threat of Iran's quest for nuclear weapons, and every one of us wonders just how close Iran is to making a bomb. During the past months and years, there is much the world has been able to uncover about Iran's secret nuclear weapons programs, but much remains hidden. Our next speaker is unique. He is one of a handful of people in the world who can talk from experience about the challenges that face weapons inspectors as they attempt to uncover the facts about a secret nuclear program. Dr. David Kay spent nearly a decade as the UN's chief weapons inspector. In 1991, he led his team into Iraq at the end of the Gulf War. His teams located the Iraqi Center for Nuclear Weapons and identified the scope and extent of Iran's enrichment activities. In 2003, President Bush appointed Dr. Kay to lead more than 1,400 members of the Iraq Survey Group in a search for Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Dr. Kay is frequently called upon to testify before Congress and is one of the world's most knowledgeable and sought-after analysts for issues relating to nuclear weapons proliferation and international terror. Please welcome Dr. David Kay.
Thank you very much, Russ. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you particularly for the kind introduction. Introductions these days aren't always that kind. Just a month ago, I was speaking to the Army's Eisenhower Conference, and I was introduced as an expert on failures in intelligence, having participated in a number of them. I thought that's obviously not something I want on my resume. I'm also happy to be here because I guess it's been 4 years or so since I've last spoken to an AIPAC policy forum. And in that time, I must say, your size has increased magnificently. So it's a real honor to be here before you. I also realize the limitations of being here. I'm essentially the warm-up act for John Bolton. Now, I know John. I've known him for a very long time. John does not need a warm-up act, as you will find out. But to get to the serious, and I must say the most disturbing aspects of the many national security problems we face these days, and that's one aspect of the Iranian issue. That is the challenges we face as the international community tries to determine the extent, timing, how close Iran is to having a weapon, and finding some way short of military action, if there is a way short of military action, out of the current situation. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes with you discussing the challenges that inspectors face. First of all, you have to recognize that Iran understands how international inspectors operate. During the days in which I headed the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspection program in Iraq, every day, every time we issued a report, my secretary kept a track of who came in to pick up copies of it. The number one delegation first every time, not surprisingly, Iraq itself. The second delegation always in was Iran. The third was North Korea. Now, the culture of the UN does not allow one to distinguish between those who are cheating and those who are not cheating. So Iran has learned for now over 20 years how inspectors operate. There have been Iranian inspectors. Iran knows as much about inspection process as the inspectors themselves know about it, and you just have to accept that. Plus, Iran, as any state who decides to cheat on their non-proliferation obligations, have a number of advantages. First of all, there are no surprise inspections. How do you think inspectors get into Iran? In fact, I'm always, when I see in the press, the IAEA is about to carry out a surprise inspection. Well, there went the surprise. But you have to have an Iranian visa. You have to take a commercial airline into Tehran. Once you're there, you have no organic ability to move around. In fact, you use Iranian drivers, you stay in Iranian-run hotels with Iranian-run bugging arrangements for those hotels. I'm going to say one of the least pleasant, I guess, surprises, because it really showed the really difficulty you have as an international inspector in maintaining any sort of secret of what we discovered in Iraq, is one day we came across a complete record of every fax that had been sent from the UN in New York, the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, to our offices in Baghdad, and a copy of every fax they had sent to New York and to Vienna. These were not electronic intercepts. These were the actual, or copies of, the actual faxes that had been sent. The inside of the country you're inspecting has a lot more intelligence and counterintelligence capability than inspectors themselves really will ever have. And finally, Iran has derived a great advantage from the fact that the Non-Proliferation Treaty is deeply flawed. The treaty assumes and asserts that there is a distinct difference between military nuclear programs and non-military peaceful programs. And therefore, Iran is entitled, for example, to have enrichment for a supposed peaceful nuclear power program. That was deeply and known to be deeply technically flawed in the 60s when it was drafted. And in fact, we have to assume, because it was, the responsibility for that being in the treaty was an American assumption that the two programs were separate. Technically, it is deeply fallacious as an assumption. If you take uranium ore out of the ground and enrich it to the 4% level used in a power reactor, 80% of the energy necessary to get it up to 90%, where it's weapons usable, is in that first 4%. So once you have an enrichment program, you have a military capability. The Iranians' assertion that they have a treaty right to have a peaceful program with enrichment is in fact an assertion that they have a right to have a military program. And there is no pleasant way to wrap around that. Now, how do states protect and deceive inspectors? Well, first of all, they don't carry out their clandestine secret military operations at the places inspectors go to. They do it somewhere else. And remember that the treaty was fundamentally based on an element of trust. You declare what you're doing, we inspectors will come in and look and certify that indeed that's what you're doing. No right to go anywhere else. In Iraq in the 1980s, for example, they didn't even have to move it very far. It was within the same confines of the facility, but the inspectors by right went to only 3 physical locations. The Iranians have moved things around the country, put them outside of known facilities, so they're hidden. Secondly, they lie. They lie as regard to the true purposes of the activities they're carrying out and the sites that, in fact, are the clandestine sites. This was quite common in Iraq. It is quite common in Iran today, and the inspectors are constantly bedeviling with the fact. And when dealing, one thing Iraq and Iran shares, I guess as an American, it was one of the hardest things for me to initially come to, is there is no embarrassment either about lying or being caught with a lie. One day I had a senior Iraqi scientist tell me when we had caught this individual in a lie, "Sir, it is not a lie when you're doing it under the instructions of your government." Well, you know, so much for truth there. Everything is a struggle to understand. They also cloak their activities with a series of steps that in fact make it very difficult for inspectors to know that something is going on there. The best environmental protection gear today anywhere in the world can be found in Iran to keep the escape of signatures from sites that will allow satellite and technical intelligence to understand what is going on in a site. They have had very good instructions on this. It goes really back to the Iran-Iraq war. It goes back to our taking apart the Iraqi program, which was very good in deception and denial. We published it. The Iranians picked it up, and they have become probably the world's greatest experts today on disguising signatures from nuclear facilities. Let me hit really what I think is the key that I think as you go forward and we look at the future course of action in Iran, both with regard to inspections and beyond, and try to separate out what inspections can do that is useful, what they can do that is not very useful, and what they simply cannot do. First of all, what inspections can do is when they're carried out vigorously and pushed rigorously ahead, they can provide the basis for international action, both of a diplomatic side and more forceful if you have to move it today. We are at a great advantage today, particularly coming out of Iraq and a failure to find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that the conclusion that the Iranians have been cheating for 20 years, have continued to cheat, lie, and not make a full and open case about their activities is not the conclusion of U.S. intelligence. It is the conclusion reached slower than we would like, but it has still been reached by the International Atomic Energy Agency and their inspectors there. That provides a basis for international action that is absolutely essential if, in fact, we are not to carry out unilateral action against Iran. Secondly, they can raise the cost of the nuclear program. Largely immaterial to Iran, with oil prices today in the 60s and perhaps going higher. The Iranians are not short of cash, but they do have to pay more for the items that they procure clandestinely, smuggle into Iran, than they otherwise would. It also, and this is more important than the money cost, it slows them down. Getting things from procurement networks that are clandestine, using various routes to get the goods into Iran so they will not be discovered easily, is a slow and arduous process. And having inspectors running around your country, even though that they don't operate with freedom of movement and are not surprised, does in fact slow your program down. And finally, having people on the ground, and I guess I feel this really very deeply as a result of recent experience, provides a way of separating the wheat from the chaff of national intelligence. Anyone who's been involved in the intelligence game, you sort of grew up with the fact that 50% of what you believe you knew as a result of intelligence was ambiguous, and 50% was utterly wrong, but you had no way of separating out which 50% you were dealing with at any one time. Inspectors on the ground have already in Iran provided means of chasing down intelligence gathered by other means. That is a vital and important role that they play. Now, what can they do that is not useful? Well, first of all, they can provide you with a false sense of security. I spent 15 years of my life in one way or the other engaged in international inspections. Let me tell you, there's no one who knows better the limitations of inspections than someone who's carried out the inspections. The other side has so many more resources. It's so easy to move around you, and the culture of the organizations you work for in the UN system have such great difficulty making moral distinctions between those who lie and cheat and carry out cruel and inhumane actions and those who are law-abiding, that it is just simply a sense of false security is a real danger you have to recognize. Secondly, and I think this is indeed the threat we face today in Iran, international inspections and the drive for conclusive proof can delay other actions till you're at the point where it is either horribly expensive to carry out those actions or virtually impossible. We may indeed not arrive at the conclusion that Iran has a nuclear weapons program until Iran tests its first nuclear device, if you demand that degree of proof. That is, for me, a frightening reality and a deep concern about international inspection. And finally, international inspection can provide, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, a justification for states carrying out activities that are permitted by the treaty, if you're not cheating, but in fact support a military program. Iran has received technical assistance from the International Atomic Energy Agency for over 20 years for its peaceful nuclear program. No guarantee that, in fact, that only supported the peaceful program. You've got to recognize, until you can draw distinctions about people who are cheating and, in fact, come to actual actionable conclusions that those sort of people should not benefit from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and other international assistance, inspections actually aren't helping your cause. Now, what inspections cannot do? And this is what I hope you really carry away this morning as you go into Ambassador Bolton's discussion of this issue. Inspection cannot provide you unambiguous certainty as to the intention, the timing, the character, and particularly when a country is going to cross that border that says it's too late, we already have a weapons program. Inspection inevitably produces results that is ambiguous because you can't throw someone up against the wall and tell them they're going to talk to you. I will tell you a personal story that still rankles me to this day. In 1991, we caught the Iraqis with their enrichment program that they denied they had. This was out in the desert, very unpleasant, 130 degree, particularly for a group of people who primarily were lab rats as scientists and not used to, not great physical exertion. A superb team that did a great deal of job. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Hans Blix, came out and looked at the site. We had Iraqi officials there, and on the way back, I was in the front seat with an Iraqi driver, an AK-47 that was his, not mine, and the chairman of the Iraqi Atomic Energy Commission in the back with Dr. Blix. The chairman started a long talk about how we could not have found what we thought we found because technically it was not possible to make a determination as to the isotopes at that level of certainty. I turned around to him and I said, I'm sorry, you don't know the science. We've been doing this in the U.S. for 25 years with regard to nuclear programs abroad. That's simply not true. As we got out of the car, Dr. Blix said, you told a member state official that he was lying. You should not do that. Believe me, that is why you don't get absolutely certainty out of international inspection. And finally, one last, and this is the last point that I think you ought to carry with you. International inspection by itself cannot stop a country from going ahead with a nuclear program if it is prepared to bear the cost, and that is its purpose. Inspection will not stop it. It requires other action from the international community. Thank you very much for this time with you.
I'm Harriet Zimmerman from Florida, and you can hear I'm croaking, but I wouldn't have missed this opportunity for anything in the world, because John Bolton is one of my heroes. He has been one of the key driving forces behind efforts to keep Iran's nuclear arms program at the top of the world's agenda and to stop Iran before it is too late. As Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and Security, John Bolton devoted himself to slowing Iran's nuclear programs, speaking plainly and passionately about the threat a nuclear Iran would pose to the United States, our allies, and the wider community. Today, as America's ambassador to the United Nations, he continues his fight at the highest diplomatic levels. His efforts to advance causes important to the U.S. pro-Israel community extend far beyond his leadership on the Iran issue and are so extensive that it would be impossible for me to list them all. However, I think we should all take pride in knowing that the man who is at Turtle Bay is the man who led the successful fight to repeal the notorious UN resolution that equated Zionism with racism. It is now my honor to introduce a good friend of mine and a great friend of the U.S.-Israel relationship, a man who speaks with conviction and honesty, a man who cares deeply about America and Israel and strengthening democracies around the globe. We couldn't want a better cleanup hitter.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I thank you for inviting me to address this year's policy conference. Your work to raise awareness and inform debates on issues vital to the national security of both the United States and Israel is a major and important contribution. Without doubt, the issues you will be tackling here over the next 2 days are among the most intractable. That is all the more reason why they are the most appropriate, indeed crucial ones to discuss. The work you do to help promote the peace and prosperity of Israel and to strengthen the ties that bind our nation helps to cement our rock-solid alliance, one that will never allow the State of Israel, as some have suggested, to be wiped off the map. I wish that I could stand before you today and say that in the last year we have not observed any troubling developments. Sadly, it seems that we have traveled back in time in some ways, back to a time when a regional leader trumpets the call of war and openly calls for the destruction of the State of Israel, back to a time when this same leader brazenly and with shocking ignorance questions the horrors that unfolded with the Holocaust. While Mr. Ahmadinejad, President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, has clearly failed his lessons in history, indulge me for a moment to offer him up at least one lesson on current events. Our commitment to Israel's security and the alliance between the United States and Israel are unshakable. The work AIPAC has done to forge and strengthen those ties should serve as a powerful reminder to any leader, now or in the future, that simply put, there will be no destruction of the State of Israel. While there is no doubt that the question of Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons is first and foremost on people's minds, and rightly so, the problems run deeper. As Secretary Rice recently noted in testimony on Capitol Hill, we have a comprehensive view of the threat that Iran poses. It is not just that the regime is seeking to develop nuclear weapons, but that it is also the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism and is working to destabilize the region to advance its ideological ambitions. It is not just the external threat that worries us, but the fact that the Iranian government oppresses its own people, denying them basic liberties and civil rights. Given the comprehensive nature of the threat, we must be prepared to rely on comprehensive solutions that use all tools at our disposal to stop the threat that the Iranian regime poses. It is with this in mind that Secretary Rice noted that the United States will actively confront the aggressive policies of this Iranian regime. And at the same time, we are going to work to support the aspirations of the Iranian people for freedom in their own country. No doubt, the primary threat that Israel and the United States face from Iran's regime is its clear and unrelenting drive to acquire nuclear weapons and the means to deliver those weapons. For years, the international community has been hearing of the mounting and voluminous evidence, confirmed by IAEA inspectors, of Iran's deception and denial in violation of its treaty obligations with the IAEA and the international community. Through intense diplomatic work, the IAEA Board of Governors last month finally reported Iran's failure to allay concerns about the nature of its nuclear program to the United Nations Security Council, a step it would have been fully justified in taking several years ago, but which was postponed in the hope that Iran would choose cooperation over confrontation. Thus far, this hope has been in vain. I find it deeply ironic that the United States is so often accused of aggressive unilateralism when we have been the ones pursuing multilateral efforts through the IAEA, including in conjunction with the British, French, and Germans, or the EU3 as we call them, as well as the Russians, and now in the United Nations. Following the conclusion of the IAEA Board of Governors meeting that will begin tomorrow in Vienna, Director General Alberti will convey to the Security Council his latest report on Iran's nuclear activities. Let me be clear. The longer we wait to confront the threat Iran poses, the harder and more intractable it will become to solve. This is not to say that we do not support the ongoing diplomatic efforts by the EU3 and the Russians, but we must not ignore Tehran's refusal to address the concerns of the international community. For over 2 years, the EU3 has engaged in active diplomacy with Tehran and presented one reasonable proposal after another. The mullahs in Iran agreed with the EU3 in Paris and then unilaterally broke the agreement by resuming the conversion of uranium into UF6 last fall. In the case of the ongoing negotiations with the Russians, the Iranian regime is engaging in doublespeak. With one voice, they are saying they welcome the discussion with the Russian Federation and view it as a possible solution to the impasse. With another voice, however, they are flatly refusing to consider the core condition that Russia, the EU3, and we would require, namely that Iran give up access to the technology and materials that would enable them to have the indigenous capability to develop nuclear weapons. Tehran's trumpeting of its right, in quotes, to a civil, peaceful nuclear program is a canard. The Russian proposal enables the Iranians to reap the benefits of civil nuclear power while addressing concerns that they are really pursuing nuclear weapons. The EU3 proposal even opened the possibility of technical cooperation on nuclear power. As the President has said, we do not oppose Iran enjoying the benefits of peaceful, safeguarded nuclear energy. It is clear, however, that Iran's pursuit of the nuclear fuel cycle is neither peaceful nor for nuclear energy. Frankly, Iran's track record justifies this fear. As the resolution passed by the IAEA Board of Governors notes, there have been, and I'm quoting now, many failures and breaches of its obligations to comply with its NPT Safeguards Agreement. Put differently, with rights come responsibilities, responsibilities that Iran has not come close to meeting. It is unclear exactly how events will play out once the Security Council takes up the agenda item of Iran. As a number of officials, myself included, have noted earlier, there are a range of options available. Letting it languish, however, is not one of them. Failure by the Security Council to act on this matter would be a highly detrimental abrogation of the duties it is charged with under the UN Charter. If the pursuit of nuclear weapons by a state with a leader who calls for another to be wiped off the map is not considered a threat to international peace and security, then what is? The Security Council should take due note that failure to act in a timely manner and with seriousness of purpose will do lasting damage to the credibility of the Council. The Security Council will likely take a graduated approach to dealing with this issue, but it is critical that we use the Council to help mobilize international public opinion. Rest assured, though, we are not relying on the Security Council as the only tool in our toolbox to address this problem. In addition to our diplomatic efforts at the IAEA, the UN Security Council, and bilaterally, we are beefing up our defensive measures to cope with the Iranian nuclear threat. As Secretary Rice has stated, in conjunction with our multilateral diplomacy, the United States will develop security measures, including looking further at the Proliferation Security Initiative and those who cooperate with us to try and deny to regimes like Iran, North Korea, and others the materials for covert programs that threaten the international system. This combined pressure, we hope, will persuade the Iranian regime to make the strategic decision to forego the pursuit of nuclear weapons. Unlike North Korea, the Iranian people have many ties to the world, whether economic, social, or cultural. We must use those ties to help raise the pressure on the Iranian regime. The United States already imposes numerous bilateral sanctions on Iran, and while it may be too soon to begin sanctions by the Security Council, it is noteworthy that many other governments around the world have begun to include the word sanctions in their discourse when discussing Iran. The Iranian regime must be made aware that if it continues down the path of international isolation, there will be tangible and painful consequences. Alternatively, if Iran follows the course of Libya and makes the strategic decision that the pursuit of weapons of mass destruction, the sponsorship of terror, and the oppression of its people makes it less, not more secure, then relations with the outside world can improve dramatically. Thus, the question of how far the Security Council will go and whether it will eventually have to consider the imposition of sanctions or the extent to which we need to develop defensive measures against Iran more fully is really a question for Mr. Ahmadinejad and his regime to answer. Sadly, the signals coming from President Ahmadinejad, and note that I did not say freely elected President Ahmadinejad, are not encouraging. Indeed, they are outright hostile. There is no doubt that the pursuit of nuclear weapons by Iran's regime has taken on greater salience given the behavior that these autocrats have displayed in other regards. Iran has long been a rogue state, the world's leading state sponsor and funder of terrorism. The quote-unquote election of Ahmadinejad has only deepened the Iranian regime's isolation and heightened tensions in the region. It is surreal coming out of the mouth of a world leader, rhetoric that we thought had been relegated to the dustbin of history. It is not just conferences or sponsoring cartoon competitions calling into question the Holocaust. It is their overt and increasingly vocal support of terrorist organizations that is profoundly disturbing. To see the Iranian president go to Damascus and hold a summit meeting with the leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas, as well as the leaders of Syria, cannot but raise considerable concern about his intention. Let there be no misunderstanding. As President Bush and Secretary Rice have made clear, since September the 11th, the United States has been a nation at war, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel and others in the region in this fight against terrorism. It is not just a question for the United States and Israel to consider, however. Obviously, the threat that Iran poses to Israel is palpably clear, but it is not just Israel that is threatened. Iran continues to actively support forces that would tear Lebanon apart, and we continue to observe an ongoing pattern on the part of the Iranian regime to interfere with our efforts to support the democratic transition in Iraq. While Iran used to view the regime of Saddam Hussein as a threat to its security, they now have a different and, frankly, far more dangerous foe: democracy. Iran is not like North Korea, where the populace has little access to outside information. The Iranian people are all too aware that the Iraqis were able to vote for candidates who did not have to pass a litmus test by a council of mullahs. For it is the people of Iran that our combined efforts must work to bolster. As Secretary Rice noted, the United States wishes to reach out to the Iranian people and support their desire to realize their own freedom and to secure their own democratic and human rights. The Iranian people should know that the United States fully supports their aspirations for a free and better future. For several years, President Bush has made clear that the nexus between terrorism and weapons of mass destruction is the primary threat to international peace and security facing the world today. Unfortunately, the developments in Iran, particularly over the course of the past year, only reinforce this view. While September 11 was a wake-up call for many here in the United States, we know that Israel has been receiving those painful calls now for decades. Whether it was wars, suicide bombings, hijackings, or kidnappings, the constant threat that the State of Israel has been under serves as a painful reminder that we must remain vigilant. I wish that I could suggest today that the threat is lower than it was before, but I cannot do so in good conscience. We know what can happen when we turn a blind eye to tyranny, whether it manifests itself as fascism or, in the case of Iran, totalitarianism. Many of you here in this room are responsible for helping me, indeed all Americans, to understand this undeniable truth. I can promise that I will do all that I can to continue to fight anti-Semitism in whatever form it takes and wherever it happens, particularly at the United Nations. As it turns out, and as you well know, my current job lends itself to such a fight. Your unrelenting and constant support, though, has been indispensable in our mutual fight for what we cherish most: freedom and democracy. And for that, I thank you most sincerely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
In just over 3 weeks, Israelis will go to the polls for an election that will replace the Prime Minister and reshape the government for years to come. The Israeli political parties are in full election mode, and their candidates for Prime Minister are campaigning feverishly around the country. At 3 points during this conference, we will go via satellite to Israel, where all 3 of the major candidates for Prime Minister will take time out from their busy schedules to address this AIPAC policy conference. It is now my honor to introduce our first such speaker. The man who is Israel's acting Prime Minister has shouldered the responsibility of leadership following the sudden collapse of Prime Minister Sharon. Ehud Olmert has been a close ally of the Prime Minister and was an early advocate of Israel's historic disengagement from Gaza and parts of the West Bank. Ehud Olmert's close relationship with AIPAC deepened during the decade he served as Jerusalem's mayor. He has met frequently with AIPAC's lay leadership and professional staff, and he was the featured speaker at this policy conference in 2004. The recently formed Kadima Party has rallied behind his leadership in the run-up to the elections. Please join me in welcoming Israel's acting Prime Minister and the Kadima Party candidate for Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert.
Thank you very much, Amy, for your kind words. Thank you all for your very warm welcome. President Bernice Manocherian, the incoming President, Mr. Howard Friedman, the Executive Vice President, my friend Howard Kohr, member of the board, distinguished delegates, the 5,000 strong participants of the annual meeting of AIPAC, dear friends. It's quite an unusual event for me to speak to you this time from Jerusalem and not as a guest speaker, as I did several times, in a very impressive podium in Washington. But these are different circumstances, and you all understand it. I had to take over under very unusual circumstances from my friend and hero, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, when he collapsed. And since then, I had to deal on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, with all the pressing issues which always make the unusual agenda of the people of Israel and the State of Israel. And let me say from the outset, thank God we have you. Thank God we have AIPAC, the greatest supporter and friend that we have in the whole world. An organization made up of people who care so much and who devoted so much of their energies and resources and love and care for the people of Israel and for the friendship between the United States and the State of Israel. You know how important America is to the State of Israel. I think you have proved over the years that you also understand how significant Israel can be to the United States of America. The role that you have played, the contribution that you have made, the involvement that you have manifested over all these years have been an essential ingredient in the strengths that we have and the ability of the State of Israel to carry on under very unusual and difficult circumstances. There are two main issues which bother me as acting Prime Minister and the people of Israel on these days. And I'm not going to talk to you about elections and about campaigns. This will leave for the Israeli scene. I want to talk to you about the two main points on the national agenda, which I believe is also very important for the international agenda. First, the emergence of Hamas as the leading power in the Palestinian Authority. We always thought that this was a mistake to allow a terrorist organization to participate in what pretend to be democratic elections. Because what is the essence of democracy if you allow a body, a group of people which do not really believe in democracy to make use of the umbrella of democracy in order to seek goals which are entirely opposed to the very essence of what democracy is all about. And this is the Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. I heard today that after they emerged from their meeting with high officials in Moscow, the leader of Hamas said time and again that he will not make peace with Israel, that he will not recognize the state of Israel, that he will not accept all these basic requirements which are essential if we are to move forward in the next few months towards some kind of a meaningful political process. So this is Hamas, and therefore such Hamas will not be recognized by the state of Israel, and we will not cooperate with the Palestinian Authority, which is governed by such an organization as Hamas. This is, of course, an unfortunate development. But I'm not pessimistic, because I promise you that while we will continue to fight terror without any hesitation, at the same time we will look for every possible opportunity to build up a process that may lead towards a resolution of some of the outstanding issues which are on the agenda between us and the Palestinians. We will take the initiative, as Prime Minister Sharon did, and we will aspire within the next few years to ultimately decide on the permanent borders for the state of Israel while separating from the Palestinians. We want the Palestinians to have their own independent state in a contiguous territory in the Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. And we want to be separated from them without sacrificing the essential security needs of the state of Israel. And towards the achievement of this goal, we will take the initiative if we will find that the Palestinians are not ready, are not prepared, and are not mature enough to be able to make the necessary adjustments within themselves in order to be ready for this challenge. We count on the cooperation, the partnership, and the friendship with the United States of America under the leadership of George W. Bush. George W. Bush has proved himself as a great friend, as a courageous leader, as a person who stands by his principles. And I know how much devoted he is to the war against terror, and we know that we can find no better partner in the whole world than George W. Bush to fight together with him against terrorists, against terrorist organizations, whether they are in the Middle East or in any other part of the world. But while we will fight together with the United States, with the support of the United States against terrorists, we will also sit with the leadership of America and build up the necessary platform for a continuous political process that will bring us closer to the eventual agreement that will resolve some of the pressing issues between us and the Palestinians. We don't want to administer the Palestinians. We don't want to dominate the Palestinians. We want to allow them to have their independent state, and at the same time we will not compromise on the security of the state of Israel and the personal security of every single Israeli citizen in every part of our country. This is our policy. This is the policy of my present government, And hopefully, if I'm elected Prime Minister within 3 weeks, which I hope very much, this will be the policy of the government of Israel in the next 4 years. There is another issue, which is a source of great concern. I know that you heard earlier my good friend and a wonderful person, Ambassador John Bolton. He has been the leading administration representative in the campaign against the attempts by Iran to possess nuclear capabilities. And now, as ambassador in the United Nations, he is leading this campaign further. And hopefully, together with other European countries, he will succeed in forcing some measures against Iran in order to prevent them from enriching uranium, which can become a major source of threat to the very existence of Israel and many other countries. Iran is a major threat to all the civilized world. A country whose leader says openly and officially that he hopes for the liquidation of another nation, as President Ahmadinejad said about the state of Israel, is someone that has to be condemned by the civilized world, and we have to take all the necessary measures so that we can stop such a leader from possessing weapons that might jeopardize us and many other countries. Again, it will be impossible to do it alone. It will be possible if America is with us, and thank God, America is with us on this issue. So finally, let me thank you so much, Amy and Bernice and Howard Core and all the other board members and the many participants, that you so graciously invited me to speak to you in this manner this year. I promise you that next year I'll be in Washington, and as I did in the past, I'll speak from the podium. And as I did in the past, I will tell you the whole truth. And I know that when I'll do that then, you'll stand up and cheer for the state of Israel, because you are the friends of Israel, and God bless all of you for that. Thank you very much.
You can't see us, but we're standing and we're waving to you, Ehud.
Well, Amy, thank you very much. I feel you very much.
Well, I know
Thank you all.
you're welcome. I know I speak for everyone here when I say to the acting Prime Minister that in these difficult times, we want to convey to you and to the people of Israel that you are not alone. We stand with you in our common search for security and for peace. And we send our thoughts and our prayers to Prime Minister Sharon and to his family. May his family and the family of Israel know that you are always in our thoughts, always a part of us.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Ehud. We very much appreciate the time that you've taken today to speak to us. And we want to thank all of the speakers this afternoon who shared their insight and their analysis. My friends, in just a moment, we will have lunch. After lunch, please proceed to the afternoon programs that you pre-registered for. They will begin at 1:30. It's now my pleasure to call on Rabbi Jonathan Magadovich of Congregation B'nai Torah in Highland Park, Illinois, who will lead us in the Motzi.
Thank God we are together. We rise. God is blessing. God rules the universe. God creates this bread. We eat this bread. We gain strength. May we always use that strength with wisdom, humility, and love. Please join as we chant. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. B'te'avon. You may be seated. Thank you.